Can RIDGID's 18-volt rear handle really compete with a 15-amp corded saw? We'll find out. This is the RIDGID R8658, and as we mentioned, it's the 18-volt rear-handled 7¼ inch circular saw. Most of the time people are referring to this as a framing saw or just rear handle saw, but basically the rear handles are typically kind of the beasts of the market, with plug-in versions like RIDGIDs and Skills that kind of set the standard of worm drive saws. These were big beasts of saws that were very heavy but got the job done for sure. So most of your framers that are ripping 2x material or larger or ripping multiple sheets at a time, that's typically what they're going for, is a rear handle saw. Now let's dive into the features of this saw, and then we'll come back and talk about pricing, about warranty, and what we think of the performance. This is the RIDGID R8658, and it's their 18-volt brushless rear handle framing saw, really is what this is. And in fact, this replaces the old worm drive saw. This is not a worm drive. This is a direct drive saw. You see the huge brushless motor sitting here directly beside the blade where it attaches, so it is not a worm drive. But in case you don't know, this is the old worm drive RIDGID. I think this is the R3210 that's been around for a long time. This is a 15-amp saw, and it's a beast to handle, to say the least, but it definitely got work done. But today we now have an 18-volt tool that replaces that plug-in tool, and still supposedly we get the performance of a 15-amp rear handle saw, and we still get the rear handle design. We just don't have to worry about the worm drive and the huge weight and all of that. And now this is not a light saw. This is not like a little sidewinder circ saw that you can pick up and throw around, but it is a little more compact than the old one, as well as a little lighter. We get a magnesium shoe. We get a magnesium blade guard as well. So that helps lighten things up, as well as keeps things nice and stiff also. We get a 13-inch length shoe, and I believe the width on this, yes, 6 inches, a little more than 6 inches, 6 1/8, 6 1/4. We do get a full 13-inch shoe on there as well. As far as capacity, we get a 2.5-inch cut capacity, and easily raise and lower that. Many times on a framing saw, they're going to leave that loose and handle their plunge cuts, and so a lot of times they'll just leave that open and drop those in for their plunges and let that shoe just drop down. But 2.5-inch cut capacity on a 90, and we see our markings here at 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, 1 inch, 1.5, 2, and of course 2.5. We also get a white arrow right here that lines up with the mark, so we have an inner mark as well as the outer mark that lines up, so easy to see that 1-inch mark, flip that down, and be able to score that plywood or whatever we're doing at 1-inch depth. Now I will say, one of my, I don't know if it's a concern or a strike against it or whatever, is just this hard metal lever here. There's no overmolding, there's no piece of plastic or anything. It's kind of short as well, so if you're tightening this thing down, it does kind of bite into your fingers to actually loosen that. But then again, most of you framers out there, you got nice big calluses on all your digits, so you probably doesn't bother you anyway. But just wanted to point that out. There could be some a little softer edges on this lever to make that a little easier. Also, when we put this dust extractor on here, it kind of gets in the way of this lever. Not really, I mean, but it flips up here and basically gets right up here to the exhaust on that extractor right there, which all you have to do is back this screw out, put that in. We'll show that here in a moment. Now we also get an LED light that's right here that shines, not so much to shine up in front of the saw. I've heard somebody say that before, that this blocks that light. I don't think that's what that light's for. I think that light is for shining in this area here, so that when you have kind of that line of sight here on the inside of the saw, you can see that lit up and see where you're actually cutting, where the blade is, not necessarily up here in front of the shoe, where typically you can easily see. We also have an arbor lock or a spindle lock there, where we can push that and lock that spindle and be able to change blades as well. We get a rafter hook that's easily going to hook on any of your 2x and 3x material, and that folds up nice and tucked out of the way. So great to have that. And we have a large compartment here for installing even this 8 amp hour battery, that if you get this in a kit, you get the 8 amp hour battery, and you can see there's plenty enough room here if in later years we get some RIDGID 12 amp hour batteries. Probably have no problem actually fitting that. So glad to see they're looking ahead and not making this this little dock here too small. Now as for our angles here, very easy to make changes. Obviously flip that lever up. Same way on this lever as on the depth adjustment lever. A little harsh here on the edges. That could be softened up a bit, or maybe even some rubber overmolding or a piece of plastic or something. But just wanted to point that out, that it is a little bit sharp on the edges, if you will. But as far as actually moving this, it's not that big of a pain. We see our markings right here, and we see our actual pointer here as well. Now, in addition to these markings, you can actually hear we have detents, and basically there's a little ball bearing in here that lines up with these indentions right here. And at each, so you can see at 0, at 15 degrees, 30 degrees, 45 degrees, and 53 degrees. So it maxes out at 53 degrees, and then detents at 45, 30, 22.5, 15, and obviously 0, and clamp those down. So it makes it a little easier for adjusting to those typical angles that we work with. We also have markings right here on the shoe as well, left of 0 as well as right of 0, so it helps out for making those quick 2x4s out of a 2x6 or whatever we need to do when we're ripping lumber. Now here on the back side of the saw, we have a wrench, tucks away in there, pull that out, and now we can make changes to our blades. We have the spindle lock up here that we've already looked at, so we can push that and back out this screw. And by the way, since this is a blade left saw, meaning that when you're holding the saw in your hand, the blade is on the left side, then it's going to be reverse thread. So we need to go righty-loosey. And then I wanted to show you something here that's not typical of your regular circular saws. So if you haven't had a rear handle or a worm drive saw before, or a large framing saw, then you may not have seen this, but we have a diamond knockout here in the blade. And that's where it goes on the spindle. You also see that diamond impregnation right there on the axis as well. So move this out of the way. And make sure that you get those diamonds lined up. And that's going to help things bite a lot better. Help to keep that blade from actually slipping on the axis or the spindle. And if you'll look at a lot of your other blades, even though this has got a round hole here, you see the diamond cut out right there. You can just take a screwdriver or pliers or something and kind of break that out and be able to use this on that diamond as well. But you need to make sure that your blades does have a diamond knockout. Again, we're going to go lefty-tighty here. Tighten that up. And we do get a full 5,800 RPMs with an electronic brake. So let's try that out. Yeah, so it looks like about a second to stop it. Maybe a second and a half, 2 seconds, and about probably a 3-second ramp up. 1001. No, actually it sounds like we're hitting full speed at around just over a second. And about a second and a half, 2 seconds to actually stop the blade. But we do get that electronic brake. And when we let off the trigger, it's going to stop the blade. And by the way, if you want to weight on this, so I've got the 8 amp hour battery in there. 12 pounds, 5 ounces with the battery, the blade, and the saw. Now we're going to use the RIDGID rear handle on some 3/4 inch plywood, and it's not just regular 3/4 inch plywood. I mean, I went to Lowe's and I said, listen, I need some 3/4 inch plywood that has a perfect 1-inch bow in the middle, and they obliged and gave me that. And I said, not only that, I want to make sure that there's voids on the edges of this plywood as well. So they just did a great job at providing some pre-bowed 3/4 inch plywood with voids missing in several places. But anyway, let's get started here. We'll run this thing a couple of times through some 3/4 inch. Then we'll throw some 2x material up here and do some rip cuts on that as well. I'm not too concerned about doing cross cuts. If a rear handle saw can't do cross cuts, yeah, there's other problems. So anyway, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to leave this thing at max depth. I think that's, for the most part, what everybody's going to use that's going to keep the shoe all the way bottomed out, or start doing plunge cuts. But we'll do that. We'll do some plunge cuts on some 2x material once we get that going. But let's try it out. So right off the bat, the exhaust is right here. Now, I do not have the extractor on here. I could put that on there, but I think that's just going to direct it further backwards. But regardless, it's dumping right on top of my shoe, right in front of me. Typically you're going to be cutting on the right-hand side and following it because it is a blade left saw. So that's one thing. I do wish maybe the port was on this side, as I've seen on other rear handle saws. But it is what it is. It's dumping it out. And again, I get it. Most rear handle stuff, you're not trying to be petite, you're just trying to get work done. But if you are interested in staying clean, you're not going to do it with this saw because it's dumping it all out right here. Also gets a little dust here, but not so much in front. It's still staying pretty clean on the front side. And by the way, plenty of power. I'm going to go to a 45. So something to note on this, when I'm looking over and looking down here at my blade right there on the plywood, I can easily see from the window here of where the blade is. However, when I'm looking over right now, I'm getting showered with kickback of the particulate coming off of that. Again, something that you are probably used to when you're using a big saw, but something to note that it is shooting quite a bit of particulate straight up at my face. Now, I've got safety glasses on, so that definitely helps, but again, something to mention. Now again, as far as power for the cut, that's no problem at all. And that's one of the great things about a larger rear handle saw is it tracks very well also. So with that large shoe, with just kind of the weight on the back and not so much up top, it just seems to track really well. You can put it on a line and follow that line rather easily. So one-handed operation, which many times are what framers doing with these, especially when they're reaching all the way across a sheet or down a 2x4 or 2x6 or 2x10, whatever they're cutting. Many times it's a one-handed operation. I'm going to put on the extractor, and it's basically going to sit in here and then kind of slide in. So this little tab here has to go inside that groove. And this is where I was talking about with the extractor on there. You can see it kind of gets in the way there when you're adjusting your depth. So again, not a huge deal, but it does get in the way. And as I mentioned, I doubt most framers are going to be using that extractor anyway. So you can see even with the extraction port on, they still have an opening here for it to bypass if you don't have any suction going here and dump it out this hole here. Again, I'm not real concerned about this, but we will hook up some extraction, see if that gets any better. I will say there's not near as much coming out of this vent now with the extraction running. Okay, now we've got a 2x6 or 2x6 in here, and we'll go ahead and make a rip cut on this. As I mentioned, I'm not too worried about cross cuts, so we'll go ahead and max out the depth here. And no problem with power whatsoever. Again, you're just getting showered with particulate with all the dust of the cut. But as far as powering through, no problem at all. Now I'm going to go to a 22.5 degree bevel. So I did stop the saw, pushing pretty hard. I mean, not pushing really hard, but it's got plenty of power to do what you need to do. I'm pushing it a little more than I typically would. For an 18 volt cordless saw, ripping 2x pressure treated lumber at a bevel, it's pretty good. I didn't want to do a plunge cut, so I'm going to loosen my depth gauge, put it over my lumber. And again, one of the things I really like is I have a marking back here. I do wish it was in a 45 as well, but typically your plunge cuts are done at a 90. So I have my 0 degree here and my 0 degree here, so I could easily read a line if I needed to. And then the power to cut through should not be an issue. Then again. Okay, let's try that again. Find a fresh spot here. So I can plunge a little too hard, but if you just go in nice and easy. Well, you saw it in action. It has no problem ripping through lumber, ripping through sheet goods. Now, you can push this hard enough to actually cause it to go into an override where it shuts the tool down and you let off the trigger and pull the trigger again, and it's off to the races. You have to push pretty hard for that to happen in like 3/4 inch material. Now, if you're doubling that up, then yeah, you probably need to kind of monitor your speed and not run through the cut, if you will. Also the same with lumber. If you're ripping through 2x material, and especially if you've got it on a bevel and you're over pushing it, it's going to shut off on you. But again, you're not tripping a breaker that you have to walk back to and trip the breaker. You let off the trigger, pull the trigger again, and you're going. Now, also on the plunge cutting, I was surprised that actually I kind of pushed a little too hard a couple of times, and it actually stopped the saw. I thought I could push a little harder, but again, I was kind of rushing it on purpose. So just take your time, drop it through, and like you would typically do, and it will be just fine. But I did want to be in all honesty and show you what was actually happening. Now, pricing on this, you can get the bare tool for $239, or you can opt to get the kit with the 8 amp hour max output battery and the charger and the case for just $110 more at $349. That's definitely the better deal. You get a lifetime service agreement on the tool and the battery if you buy the kit. And so you don't have to worry about it as long as you own this, and make sure that you register this within 90 days of purchase to get that lifetime service agreement. Check it out from your Home Depot. We'll also have a link in the description. Make sure you keep track of us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and even TikTok. And if you don't mind, would you hit that like and subscribe button if you haven't done so already? And by all means, if you hated our video, well, give us a thumbs down. But would you let us know in the comments why? Have a great day and keep smiling.